In this video, I'll tell you about the good and the bad of Warhammer Age of Sigmar Spearhead after 3 months since release. Warhammer Age of Sigmar came out with a new edition of the rules, 4th edition, about 3 months ago or so. There were many changes and tweaks from the last edition, of course, and if you want to find out more about, what changed, I'd check elsewhere on YouTube, honestly. I'm generally not an Age of Sigmar player, so I'm not here to compare and contrast, the differences between editions. However, Games Workshop also picked up a feature from the new 10th edition of Warhammer 40k that came out last summer, Combat Patrol. Well, it's called Spearhead now in Age of Sigmar, but it's kind of the same thing. Spearhead isn't a different game than Age of Sigmar, technically. Much like Combat Patrol for 40k, it uses the same rules as the base Age of Sigmar game. The difference is that you play with far fewer models than you generally would in Age of Sigmar, and you don't design your own army list. It's kind of designed for you. This is also very different than usual Age of Sigmar games, of course. I wanted to, after 3 months or so of it being out in the real world, kind of tell you about what I think are the good and the bad things about Age of Sigmar Spearhead. Let's start with the good. Spearhead is for beginners. It's designed to teach you how to play regular Age of Sigmar with the hopes, I'm sure, that you will eventually expand into a full Age of Sigmar army. I think originally Kill Team was designed to help you get into 40k, right? And Warcry was designed to help you get into Age of Sigmar, but they were very different rule sets that didn't necessarily transfer very well from the small skirmish to the bigger games. Then Games Workshop came up with the Combat Patrol concept in 10th edition 40k, like I mentioned, and refined it for Spearhead in 4th edition Age of Sigmar. You're learning the Age of Sigmar rules when you're learning Spearhead. Speaking of rules, the rules are free to download, and GW says that they always will be. This is also the same as Combat Patrol in Warhammer 40,000. It's really good because it removes a barrier to entry, especially for beginners. They won't have to buy the models and then also buy some expensive books just to learn how to play. They can download the rules and the specific Spearhead War Scrolls from the download section at the Warhammer community website. Spearhead is pretty easy to collect, then build, then play. You just buy a Spearhead box in pretty much most situations. If you're already a player, then you might be able to use the models that you already own if you own the right ones. But again, it's kind of aimed at beginners, so it's assumed that you don't have the models already. The boxes are $145 American mostly, except for the Sons of Bahamut Spearhead, the big giant guys. That one's $170. This is, I guess, technically a good deal according to GW because those models are $75 a piece, so 3 of them would be $225 and you're getting them for $170. As I've been building them, though, those models aren't worth $75 a piece. They're just straight up not worth $75 a piece. They got lots of extra parts, but I just don't think they're worth that much money, but your mileage may vary. Either way, you buy a box and then you build it as the free war scrolls that you downloaded will tell you how to, weapons, loadouts, and all that kind of stuff, and then you're ready to play. There's no analysis paralysis on list building as you are a new player trying to figure out which way to build your stuff. You just follow the instructions, which is great for beginners. You just build it and then play. Related to that last point, Spearhead boxes are a pretty decent start to building a larger Age of Sigmar army if you decide to do so. They all kind of give you a leader in some fashion, and then you get foot troops, and then some of them will give you cavalry, and some of them will give you maybe a vehicle, and some of them will even give you artillery. If you wanted to start building a larger Age of Sigmar army, there's generally nothing that you can't use in these Spearhead boxes to do that. These boxes are great jumping off points for your potential larger army if you want to go down that road. Spearhead is great if you don't want to just focus on one army. You can go wide instead of going deep. Build and paint a Skaven Spearhead like I just did. They were a bunch of fun to, paint on Twitch twice a week at twitch.tv/tabletopminions. Give a follow if you're interested. And then you can start working on Sons of Bahamut next, like I am now. I don't really want to paint both armies to 2,000 points. But doing the spearheads is quicker and a lot of fun. It gives you a taste, and then you can move on to a different army. If I decide to do another spearhead, it'll probably be Cities of Sigmar. After that, who knows? The games of Spearhead can be very quick, at least quicker than a full 2,000 point game of regular Age of Sigmar or Warhammer 40,000. Games Workshop has said that games of Spearhead should take about 45 minutes, but I've rarely found them to be that quick, That said, whenever I play most games, they take longer than I'd think because, we're having a good time chatting and telling stories and things like that. Games should be fun, remember that. However, if you are trying to get done quickly and be serious about it, like in a tournament setting or something like that, then Spearhead can make that happen pretty quickly. Most of the Spearheads are interesting forces to build and to paint and to play, unlike many of the new combat patrols for 40K, which are more like oops, all troops, which I don't personally find very interesting. Admittedly, there are some dull spearheads as well. Fire Slayers, which is basically a field full of little naked guys with beards. Lumineth Realm Lords, kind of boring as well, because they're all just like nearly the same kind of silhouette on everybody. But many of them have fun variations in, troop types and cavalry and bigger figures and stuff like that. It really makes those groups fun to, build and paint and then play. Some spearheads are low in numbers of models, right? Sylvaneth is only 10 models, and Sons of Bahamut, as I mentioned earlier, I'm building them right now, is only 3, the big ones. Then we head into some of the bad things. Experienced Age of Sigmar players probably won't be too interested in Spearhead. As I've said before, it's designed to be appealing to beginners. It's designed to teach you Age of Sigmar and kind of set the hook to get you playing more long term. However, if you've already been playing previously, maybe you already have a 2,000 point army or whatever, then you might not be interested in playing in this format. Maybe if you're thinking about expanding into like another army, or just you're into playing super quick games, but that's probably about it. I wish the board was a bit bigger and there was a bit more and like potentially sort of varied terrain to choose from, right? I like playing skirmish games on smaller boards. The 22 by 30 kind of kill team and Warcry size is nice for those games, which always generally have smaller, fewer models. I also love playing on 2 foot by 2 foot boards for small skirmish games. But for many of these Spearhead boxes, 22 by 30 seems a bit cramped to me. And I like fun terrain. And although the Spearhead terrain is nice and was a lot of fun to paint, I did a lot of OSL on it and stuff like that, seeing the same 4 small pieces in each match seems a bit dull. Related to the last point, or at least I think it is, sometimes the games can feel very samey, you know what I mean? Because the small board can kind of limit your options a bit, and then the objectives are mostly in the same spots all the time and that kind of stuff. It's pretty much turn 1, there's charges, you get into charging, and then the units are kind of a bit locked up, right? And then eventually there are certain other units that come in at prescribed turns. This comes in turn 2, turn 3, whatever, to potentially, change the tide of the battle, and sometimes that happens, and sometimes it doesn't, and then eventually the game is over. Now, Lord knows, I am not a competitive player, or even a good one, but maybe with a bigger board or different terrain shapes and stuff like that, there'd be more different play and it wouldn't be so samey. So what about the future of Spearhead? Well, we've already seen them release new Spearhead Army alternate boxes as they release new battle tomes, which are like codexes if you're used to 40K, right? So that'll give you some more choice. As a person who built and painted the Skaven Spearhead from the Skaven Tide box, it's cool to see that I can just get a box of Storm Fiends and a Warp Lightning Cannon and then use the Grey Seer and the 20 Clan Rats from my current Spearhead to make a different new Spearhead. This adds some variation so people don't get bored without having to buy an entire new box. Now, unfortunately, the Storm Fiends and the Warp Lightning Cannon are out of stock on the website, and they cost a total of $121 in comparison to $145 for the whole new Spearhead box, so, maybe try eBay. I assume they'll release new sets like the current Fire and Jade gaming pack for Spearhead, which will include, new cards, which is then adding to the new functionality for the format and that kind of stuff. And also maybe a different board with potentially different terrain. That said, I think it might be much more interesting to release a bigger board, or maybe you can, put a new board that they release together with the current board, like side by side, not the long way, but side by side. And then, the new terrain from the new box, add it to the old terrain, all that kind of stuff. I could see that being a more interesting playstyle for when you've played a whole bunch of Spearhead games and you want to switch it up. Either way, I think that Spearhead is a net positive for people interested in the new edition of Age of Sigmar, and I think Games Workshop built off of the things that they learned with Combat Patrol for Warhammer 40k last year, which had some mistakes. If you're thinking about getting into Age of Sigmar, I can't stress enough that you should start with a Spearhead box before you drop big money on a full army. Start playing with the smaller forces and see if the game rules are something you're interested in. You can then start to expand later if you're feeling it. Did Spearhead get you into Age of Sigmar, or does it put you off for some reason? How many Spearheads do you already have or plan to have? Or do you think that there's a better way to get into Age of Sigmar? Let us all know down in the comments below. If you liked this video, do me a solid and hit the like button while you're down there as well. It helps to kind of spread the video better through YouTube so more people can see it. If you want to see videos like this every single Friday, then hit the subscribe button down there as well. It's free. Thanks for watching.